Dharavi, located in the midst of the city of Mumbai, India, comprises of 520 acres of land on which 500,000 to 600,000 people live and work. Through the 19th century and subsequently, migrants from different parts of the country and those evicted from the island city of Mumbai moved into these marshy lands and created Dharavi as it is today. There are potters from Saurashtra in Gujarat, tanners from Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, food processors, embroidery workers and recyclers, all in this city to earn a livelihood. They've managed to make Dharavi a flourishing marketplace that it is today. Until 1956, Dharavi was outside the city limits of Mumbai. As Mumbai expanded northwards, the city grew around Dharavi, and by the mid-70s, it was almost in the middle of the city. In the 80s and 90s, the government came up with various schemes to redevelop Dharavi. Some infrastructure and some amenities were provided. Some houses were constructed, but that didn't change Dharavi much. Then in 2004, a proposal to improve the entire area was presented to the government. It was based on acknowledging the high value of land on which Dharavi was located. This was welcomed by the government of Maharashtra. Briefly, it sought to divide Dharavi into 5 sectors, invite international bidders of high caliber and financial repute to bid for these projects, and left the planning of the redevelopment, provision of infrastructure and planning to them. It was considered by the government to be a win-win solution. The government would get money from the developers as compensation for the land. The residents would be provided a 25 square meter house, and similar dispensation was made for the commercial units, while the rest of the land would be exploited to recover the costs and make profits. Somehow the residents, and in many instances their leadership, felt a deep unease about this proposal. It was a reaction that was shared by many citizens who also were following the city's development plans. This unease arose from several aspects of the project's design and development strategy. Firstly, there was the issue of land ownership. The municipality, which is the largest landowner in Dharavi, and more importantly, the agency that is going to ultimately manage the entire infrastructure, must be involved in every aspect of this process. To date, there has been no discussion about how this would be done, and neither is there permission obtained to go ahead with this scheme. Secondly, the city has a slum rehabilitation plan in which the slum dwellers in any case get a 25 square meter house. Why were they getting what they would be getting anyway when the private sector and the government would make so much money? Thirdly, there was no census of structures. All informal settlements have structure owners, renters and subtenants. There has been no clarity of who of these are entitled to an alternative. Subsequently, such a census was done. But the question remained, how was this project going to go forward if a majority of the households either didn't want to participate or didn't have the necessary documents to get this entitlement? Fourthly, it is estimated that it provides work on a daily basis to 100,000 others who come in for employment. The plans do not demonstrate how these kinds of workplaces can be protected and facilitated to grow. Now, this is vital in a situation where the livelihoods of such large numbers is concerned, to deal with the probability that the destruction of this workplace can have huge economic and social and political implications. The residents of Dharavi and citizens concerned with the development of Dharavi want a more nuanced and actively responsible stance from the government. This includes, first of all, a clear understanding of the internal community formations within Dharavi, which must be seen as a town rather than a sea of slum dwellings. Each self-defined community or neighborhood has to see value and advantage in combining their space with those who live alongside them to produce better amenities, services and public spaces for them. Residents' associations must be involved in exploring the entire transition process, from moving to transit houses, from dealing with how livelihoods would be affected and then relocating to their homes. Cities like Mumbai are facing shortages of water, electricity and management of drainage, sewage and garbage. These have to be considered while designing amenities and services and looking at the number of floors that this housing project can take. Given the size of this population and the project, it is the responsibility of the government and the residents to first undertake small pilot projects to examine the validity of the assumptions on the basis of which this project can be taken forward. This has huge implications for any large brownfield project of slum upgrading anywhere in the world, as more and more large slums come within city limits and their land values increase, and this propels interventions that work for investors and the city but rarely for the residents. Who is to take charge of addressing all the risks and uncertainties of disrupting so many people without having clear and demonstrated knowledge of how to manage these risks in the midst of economically uncertain times?